Good morning, everyone, again. So today I'm just going to take you through some observations and thoughts about cover crops and cover crop destruction. Something we want to touch on because obviously a lot of people are growing cover crops. How many of you here grow or have something to do with cover crops? It's normally about 50% of the people that are active in their beet growing. Yeah, nice. I don't need to do the spiel on cover crops. They bring a whole host of benefits: nutrient holding, soil restructuring, reducing leaching and runoff. They have a lot of benefits, and I don't want to focus just on the negatives. I do accept they have a lot of good things that they do. However, we all know that they do bring a lot of challenges as well on the way, and thinking about how we manage them best to make sure that they don't compromise the subsequent beet crop is really important. So there's two things we can start off thinking about. One is something that we're sort of through that point now, but I just want to mention it. So that is nematodes, and just thinking about nematode control. So I will touch on this in a minute, but our cover crop guide has some information on it. But some cover crop species, particularly your brassicas, can be very tasty for nematodes. They can help them reproduce, and they can really exacerbate the problem if it's there. There are class 1 varieties that will prevent that and stop that, so they're a good option. But really, it's just a call to arms of, if you don't know if you have BCN, it is worth testing and understanding if you have it present and just tailoring your cover crop selection to that. So that's something to think about when we get through the year, get into autumn. What can we think about right now, right this minute? What is the challenge? What do we need to think about? And that's the green bridge risk. We talk about it all the time. It's probably one of Mark's top 10 phrases. And that's thinking really about, firstly, are your different cover crop species hosting virus? But secondly, is it also tasty to aphids? Because you need the two together for it to be a risk. If something's high in virus level, but is not then tasty, and the aphids aren't feeding on it to then feed on the sugar beet, it's not so much for a risk. So some of you will have seen this. We released this mid last year. So this is our cover crop guide. A lot of the information is sort of widely available information, but we thought it'd be handy putting it all in one place. But the bit I want to draw your attention to is are these two rows here. So we have one called virus yellow's host risk. So this is how much of the virus is in the plant, basically. We did test the 3 different viruses separately, so we understand which viruses the cover crops do or don't host. However, from a management perspective, that's not really that relevant. You can't do much about that. That information is not going to make much of a difference to you on farm. It's mainly you need to know, is it a risk or not? So we've simplified it, kept it into one row for you. But that's not the whole story. Obviously, the second part, as I just mentioned, is also understanding if the aphids like feeding on those cover crop species as well. So the team did also score the different cover crops for the amount of aphids that were on them as well. And it's obviously needing those two together that provides a risk. However, BBRO doesn't not support, or say any cover crop species are better than the other. What we want this information for is just to think about, firstly, selection and then timing of destruction. If you're maybe on a heavier soil type where travelling and getting on and destroying your cover crops is more challenging, think about avoiding some of the higher risk species that you might be able to get on farm. Some examples of that, red clover is a good one, or not a good one. That hosts a high level of virus, so there's a lot of virus in the cover crop if it is infected, and it's very palatable for aphids as well, so one that is a bit more of a risk. Whereas next to it, we've got Phacelia. Obviously, Phacelia is a really popular cover crop, high biomass, quick growing. That has a high level of virus in it, but quite low for aphids. Obviously, not a very tasty plant. I've not chewed on Phacelia myself, but clearly it's not that palatable if you're an aphid. So, as I said, we're not saying do or don't grow anything, but hopefully that gives you some information out there when you're thinking about either timing of destruction now or thinking about your selection of mixes in the autumn. So, coming back to the present, what we're thinking about now and thinking about that green bridging risk, I've got some demo pots at the front. What we've done here is we've got some here that are still green. So these have been left in the frost. And these give a really good example of your frost-tolerant species versus your non-frost tolerant. That can be a good option because if you're struggling to get on and get good destruction, obviously the weather doing some of the job for you is always a win. So in the first pot, we've got crimson clover and buckwheat. As you can see, the frost has completely eliminated the buckwheat. We've got pretty much no buckwheat left. It's completely dead. But the clover's pretty much untouched. If anything, the buckwheat's disappeared and the clover's enjoying itself because there's no competition with the buckwheat. In this one, we've got a radish and rye mix. As you can see, the radish has actually been pretty much unaffected, a little bit of damage, and the rye has died back. And then finally, a real classic is vetch. Vetch is very frost susceptible. It doesn't need much frost at all to kill it off. So the vetch is gone, but our black oat is still very much alive. So just the weather alone can give you some benefit. And as I just highlighted, maybe thinking about frost susceptible species can be a good one if you're struggling to get timely destruction. Following on from that, I will touch on grazing separately, but if we're going to go down the chemical route, we've got 3 pots here, again, the same mixes sprayed with glyphosate. In this case, I've actually done quite a good job, but I will caveat that with the fact that we use shop-bought glyphosate, which is always very effective. It's very well formulated, it's very concentrated. And they were put on the windowsill in the lab, which was very warm, so it very much sped up. They were supercharged to die, really. So, which is sort of the opposite of what I want you to take away from my messaging, which is glyphosate obviously works really slow at this time of year. Cover crop destruction, a good time to spray is often around Christmas. You want to give yourself sort of the 3-week time to die off before your 6 weeks before sugar beet drilling, which I'll come back to in a minute. So just thinking about glyphosate use, getting on early, making sure we're getting good dieback and really getting rid of that green bridge. Secondly to that as well, is just thinking about if you have clovers and things in your mix, 2,4-D can be very, very beneficial. So Kylio, glyphosate, 2,4-D can use together. However, we need a time machine really now because that has a 60-day interval before drilling. So we have to have used it on the 19th to be drilling by the 20th of March. So not something necessarily to think about this year, but in future years, if you've had problems with killing off certain species in your mix, particularly legumes, 2,4-D and that Kylio could be a good option as well to make sure we get good, effective dieback. This pot I've got on the end, this very lonely random pot at the end, was a good demonstration pot. It hasn't survived so well after the past week. So this was the same as the radish and rye pots over there. It was also on the lab windowsill, like a lot of them were. And for context, in our lab, we have our different virus cultures. And in each virus culture, there's obviously a certain number of aphids that are feeding, reproducing the virus. But a limitation to that is you have to open the door to water them. And occasionally you get escapees. And obviously we do that on a certain rota, so we're not contaminating our different cultures. But it does mean sometimes some aphids get out. Obviously, normally there's not green matter in the lab. The lab team don't like plants in the lab, so I was given special permission for these to actually be allowed out. And we looked on the windowsill, and the radish on this one was absolutely teeming in aphids, absolutely covered in aphids. And it was a really good point of the fact that it only takes 1 or 2 aphids. You know, there won't have been a lot that escaped from that culture. It wouldn't have been many, might have even just been 1. And within a week, again, because it was warm, which made it worse, the plants were absolutely teeming in them. So it doesn't take much. It only needs 1 aphid to land onto your susceptible cover crops, and you will have a problem. And again, if that's then got a lot of potentially got virus in it, you're building up a reservoir of virus-infected aphids that will then potentially spread onto your sugar beet crop at drilling as well. So really good demonstration, something to think about. Getting that timely destruction is really important, 6 weeks ahead of sugar beet drilling. I often get the question, some of the payment schemes, sort of SFIs and that, and very much specify that you can't destroy 6 weeks before any form of drilling. But if you're sort of aiming for 1st of March, you can get on sort of early January as well. So just something to think about. If we're aiming for 1st of March, you should be able to get destruction as well. And if you're spraying your glyphosate on, it will work in time. Just something to think about as well. On to grazing. We don't profess to be grazing experts at BBRO. There's probably people in this audience that know a lot more about cover crop grazing than I do, but it's just something worth touching on. 2 things really. One is thinking about nitrate leaching and making the most of that. So we all know that cover crop grazing can be good because it's freeing up and cycling those nutrients really quickly. But conversely, that can also be challenging because obviously you're freeing them up if you get heavy rainfall events. All that great nutrition is being lost through the soil profile. So the NICS cover crop report that ADAS undertook shows that leaving 10 to 20% green cover reduces that nitrate leaching, so something worth considering. But again, green bridging risks are weighing up there as well, challenges there. The other good thing with leaving some green top does mean that you can get on, and if you do decide to spray off with glyphosate, you will get better, obviously, control and efficacy. You need some of that green top remaining. So on the grazing front, I completely get it. It can be a bit of a trade-off. You might leave your interval a bit closer to sugar beet drilling if you're wanting to feed the sheep and meet your weight gain targets, but certainly don't don't dismiss it and think, oh, they're eating it, so it'll be fine. There will still be aphids walking around on some of those cover crops that you've got in your grazing mix as well. So just something to consider, and maybe get out there and have a bit of a look of what you've got going on farm as well. So with that, the other thing that we've got talking about nutrients is nutrient release from cover crops. It's probably the question I get the most. If you said, what is the most common question you get relating to cover crops, George? It would be, how much can I adjust my nitrogen application on based on what was in the cover crop or what the cover crop will release? Which is a fantastic question, which we don't have an answer to, being perfectly honest. There isn't an easy answer. You can I've sat for many an hour reading the literature, trying to understand it more. Obviously, part of my job, I want to understand what research we can do, but there's no point duplicating what people have already done. And I can give you the really great advice of your cover crop mix can release nothing to 100 kilos of N for the subsequent crop. Quite a bit of a difference, and probably not a risk you're going to want to take. So certainly something that's challenging. On the back of that, we are talking to people that have done some of that research to understand how we can advance it, also how we can try and make it a bit more sugar beet specific. So we're off a bit of a foray into it this year. So we've got 2 cover crop trials in Norfolk to start with. They've been done by the farmer commercially, so they've gone through, drilled different replicated strips for us. We've been assessing the biomass, the soil, nitrogen levels, all those sorts of parameters. And we will follow that through to the sugar beet crop and see if there's any differences. And again, being completely transparent and seeing if it even makes any sense. So that data will be hopefully available. We'll update you as we go through in the year. And in those as well, we'll have the PlentySense nitrate sensors. So Alistair's got one on display in the crop watch area. So that measures nitrate at 10, 20 and 40 centimetres. Just trying to understand that timing of release as well. So that'll be an interesting one to follow. Certainly won't give us all the answers, but might generate some good discussions. Which brings me on to sort of my final topic is there's so many questions on cover crops. We can talk about what species mix, we can talk about how they should go in and be established, we can talk about if we should put nutrition on them, we can talk about what soil type you're on, we can talk about timing and method of destruction. You could have a research organisation just looking at cover crops. So this is where we're interested to hear from you guys. We want to hear your experiences, what's working for you. You know, there's people that have been doing cover crops before they were cool, and it's just a day-to-day part of their farming rotation. We want to hear what's working for you, and to also help with that, and to help people that maybe are thinking about changing. Maybe you're going into cover crops for the first time, or you want to try some different mixes. Doing some on-farm trials, talking to us about it. We can help you through that. We can help you do some data collection as well. So what we've done, and I'll talk about it in my main talk later, is we've produced an on-farm trials guide, which is in all of your folders, just to give you a bit of a steer if you're thinking about trying some different things on farm, sort of different ways to go about that, but also contacting us and we will help support you in that. And you can't really lose. It's going to be then tailored information to your own farm, your own system, your own equipment, and find out really what works for you. So please do let us know if you get up to anything, if there's any questions you want answering or any research you think we should be doing in the cover crop area. Because we would be interested to hear how things are working for you. Has anyone got any questions or observations or anything?